All right, this is Devin Fields for the facilities planning class, dealing with the architecture firm interview project that we had. Um, the person I interviewed, his name was Kevin Knott. He is an LEED AP plus or BD plus C urban designer for an architect firm in Boston called NBBJ. Uh, the LEED AP BD plus C certification is a professional credential that shows understanding of green building design, construction, and operations. So, pretty good credential to have there. Actually, this picture here on this first slide is one of their projects for Poly Pavilion UCLA. They worked in design with that facility, renovating uh, different aspects of it. All right, so moving on to the next slide here. Like I mentioned, NBBJ is in Boston. So while the firm in Boston doesn't specifically work on sports stadiums, Kevin mentioned that their LA firm is largely invested in sport design, and a lot of the projects are joint projects between firms. But a few of the projects he mentioned that their firm worked on together was Rupp Arena the Rupp Arena reinvention in Lexington. Um, they worked to transform the facility into an inclusive arena that better connects to the city and features contemporary amenities that fans and players expect. And BBJ worked to design the facility to be a more inviting facility in order to accommodate the models of some of the modern sports facilities. The project was unique in that NBBJ was assigned to accommodate for the current traditions and preserve the history of the stadium while incorporating the modern ideas. Um, the other one was the Hangzhou Olympic Sports Center, which was a really neat thing to do some research on. It's a project in the works. So NBBJ, in partnership with CCDI, designed the Hangzhou Sports Park, which was on a 400,000 square meter site near the central business district of the city. Um, Directly from the website, that stated the site plan is composed of three layers of activity. An above grade platform defines the Sports Boulevard, which links programs such as the main stadium and tennis tournament facilities together. On the ground level, pathways, gardens, and plazas form a network of public recreation activities designed for alternative and extreme sports. Sunken spaces and courtyards lead to an extensive below grade retail pavilion containing boutique stores, restaurants, and multiplex cinemas. Um, and another one he mentioned was the Eagles Nest at Lincoln Financial Field, where the Philadelphia Eagles ownership selected NBBJ to design the NFL franchise's Lincoln Financial Field. So some pretty cool stuff there in the sport field. He mentioned some of the awards. They got Most Admired Healthcare Firm, which is one of the aspects that their firm deals with, largely in part with healthcare organizations. But they got Most Admired Healthcare Firm by Interior Design. It was their eighth consecutive year appearing on that list, and its second year in taking the top spot. Uh, NBBJ is also ranked as the seventh largest healthcare design firm in the world, and that's based on revenue. Second one he mentioned was they were named top 10 most innovative company in architecture by Fast Company, and they actually got that 2 years in a row. And the organization that nominated them noted NBBJ for turning design into science, so that was kind of a neat thing. And he also mentioned they got first prize in an urban design competition in Shantou. So seems like they have some pretty good credentials. Um, so Kevin, I asked Kevin what it meant, or what makes them unique from others, and I think overall from our talk, he said there's a large accentuation on green initiatives and what he said down below here. NBBJ is unique from other architecture and design firms for we focus not only on the aesthetics and beauty of the design, but also how design affects the functionalities of our clients and their various work processes. So, some considerations of designing and building a new facility. Kevin had a lot of insight on it, and he actually said there are a myriad of factors that go into making one. But he did to name a few. As he said, there were tons. He did name a few that stood out the most. He goes on to mention that buildings are unbelievably complicated structures. So, like I said, there are a myriad of factors that go into making one. But he mentions the ones below that I put here on the slide here. They kind of outline the big picture considerations that affect every project of every size. First one being the biggest, most considerable, is the budget. So how much? He mentioned, budget is the most considerable aspect, and that it's involved all the way from initial talking / design, to the finance, to finalizing the project. It also dictates every aspect that architects need to consider. Things like material, interior design selections that the firm select need to fit the budget given. Schedule is a big consideration. How long do they have to build? Are there timing considerations in relation to the institution for whom the building is being built? Kevin says that schedule needs to be tweaked to fit the final cost of the project. If a project takes longer than expected, then costs are going to go up. Hence going over the projected budget. Another aspect he mentioned was program. So the facility's use, list of spaces. The design of the facility will be formulated by the overall objective of the facility. Like I mentioned before, their project with Rupp Arena in Kentucky depended on preserving the old while adding a new concept. RBBJ made their designs based on that concept and made sure to utilize old spaces. Another aspect is context. So how does the building relate to its surrounding environment? Not just aesthetically, but functionality. For example, access, service, visibility, and lastly, sustainability or operating efficiency. So, like Kevin deals with the most is how green is it. The firm determines their focus a lot on the green initiatives as it is one of their specialties. Kevin mentions that incorporating the green aspect into facility design requires a lot of communication between client and the firm because they usually tend to deal with cost efficiency and long-term energy benefits. In terms of facility site location, we discussed a little bit about it. He actually had an interesting point. From asking this question, Kevin brought up an interesting point regarding the decision of sport facility locations. They're difficult to cite, for there's inevitable catch-22, as he called it, in terms of the facility's surroundings. So, the project wants to have a vast open area for the structure itself, as well as an area for an enormous amount of parking required. However, these areas are typically found in suburban settings, but the catch-22 lies in, conversely, the project also wants to be located in an urban setting due to the density of the surrounding population, which leads to better sales, profitability, as you have more people that can access the facility. So a combination of the two is most desirable. Kevin gave me an excellent example of this, which is Gillette Stadium, actually, located in Foxborough. It's in proximity to Boston. However, it's located far enough away from the dense, small area that Boston has, and it has plenty of sufficient space for the numerous amenities that it has. Got Patriot Place surrounding it, and Kevin used that as an example of a pretty good, a great site selection. So we discussed a little bit about the concerns that an architect would have when building a facility. He did it in a general state. He wasn't specifically referring to a sport facility, but across the board, he was saying that the similarities are all, the same for different types of facilities. But so some of the three of the concerns he mentioned that were the biggest ones. One was zoning, which he said was the largest concern when the government is taken into consideration. Kevin mentions that zoning is essentially a government statute which limit the floor area ratio or the density of the building and building use. So, is the building residential, commercial, civic? And this is for a particular area. This will have the largest impact on urban areas. Kevin said due to the limitation of open space. However, suburban and even rural areas often have tight zoning ordinances requiring minimum amounts of open green space. Permitting is the other one that he said was another major concern. Essentially, a building permit is the final okay from the governing body to proceed with construction. And then lastly, big concern is building inspection. He said it's similar to permitting, but it's conducted after the building is constructed. And it's the governing agency's final review of the building. So a building inspector will conduct a thorough inspection of the building when it's completed, and even during construction, to make sure that all local building codes have been met. So as I mentioned before, Kevin says budget is one of, if not the largest consideration when it comes to constructing a building, and also for opportunities of reducing the cost. So in his firm, opportunities for reducing the cost is always going to be a consideration. It's the client firm relationship depends a lot on them trying to help them efficiently. So saving money, he was interesting because he said the building's infrastructure, for example, elevator, restroom cores, structural framing, floor slabs. He was saying those kind of things don't really, they're not necessarily the largest consideration for reducing costs. A lot of those are just flat rates, the general construction. It usually isn't reduced unless the overall size of the building is in their design. The materials for building the infrastructure of the facility is pretty straightforward, and the costs really depend on size. So he had two other aspects that he used for saving money. It was a little confusing, but he was talking about the skin. So he said it was the number one in considering reducing costs. For a sport facility, this may include, cement. So it's a way of the old. You have cement walls everywhere, but newer facilities may include different skins. Like on the infrastructure or the steel frame, you might have solar panels, such as the Dragon Stadium in Taiwan, which I actually have a picture of in the next slide. But that's sort of like your skin. It's like what material you're going to use to actually create the building itself outside of the infrastructure, like the steel framing. He said that can all vary so much, and depending on what material you use will dictate the cost. Then last, he said just the finish touches, recessed lighting or things like that. Those are second to the skin in terms of reducing costs. You can fancy up the interior of a building as much as you want, and those are all factored into how much money a client would want to spend. We talked briefly about green solutions. He didn't really have any that were specifically pertaining to sport facilities, so I didn't have a whole lot of info to share here, but He did mention a competition they were in called Living with Water, which was really cool. It's actually a very neat project, not really dealing with sports facilities, but he went on to explain the Living with Water design competition, and he said it's one of their most fascinating sustainable projects. and they got an honorable mention for it. The project looked at multiple strategies for dealing with sea level rise, which is a growing concern for waterfront facilities. And his facility being in Boston, they had a lot of projects dealing with this, with some of the facilities that are right near the bay there. Um, Other than that project, Kevin, he just briefly mentioned recycled water, green roofs like solar panels and the solar orientation, um, and retention strategies. So insulating of walls, stuff like that, heating, retention. He mentioned those are all things that would go into trying to make a stadium green, and some of the initiatives that he's seen in sports facilities that have used. All right, and so I asked him, what were the common pitfalls and challenges that you face as someone who works in an architect firm. Um, Number one, he said lack of communication. This is, this is also prevalent in the sports industry in general, any management position. But Kevin says lack of communication is an obvious one, and it's not only between firm and employees, but mostly between contractors, clients, companies that they use for building the projects, and even more than that, the process of building a sport facility or any large facility, in fact, depends on so many different processes that, when not properly communicated, it just creates slow progress or mistakes, which they don't want to go back and fix. He mentioned client indecision. It's a problem that Kevin said the firm itself runs into. When they are working on specific projects, it's important to keep an open communication line between the client and the firm. Um, and then not lastly, but he mentioned the unexpected existing conditions. He mentioned that the existing conditions can sometimes affect their projects. Many of the designs are based on updating or creating green solutions for an already existing facility. So they oftentimes ran into unexpected existing conditions of certain buildings. And like we reiterated enough, budget problems are always an issue that they run into. He said this is almost an obvious one. Budget plays the largest part of the building process and designing aspect of the facilities. He mentions this over and over throughout all his answers, and it's a big one. He was saying was the inaccurate estimates on budgets. This affects his firm since they design their facilities with certain materials or aspects that they have set costs. If there are inaccurate estimates, then there has to be updates or changes done with the firm and even with the client. So that's where you can run into a lot of problems there. So lastly, the resources, like I mentioned, was Kevin, and he gave me awesome links to a lot of their projects. These are just a couple that I used here, and it was good. It was a good interview. I learned a little bit, and it was good.